In the Narcissistics framework, one of the most dangerous dynamics of the narcissist, particularly the covert empathy-based narcissist, is their unwavering belief that they are true empaths, virtuous individuals, and even moral paragons. They perceive themselves as deeply compassionate, enlightened, and emotionally superior beings. Simultaneously, they project onto others the role of the villain, framing you as the one who is cold, lacking in empathy, or morally deficient. This combination of self-perceived angelic virtue and the external demonization of others creates a distorted reality that serves their narcissistic identity while causing profound harm to those around them. The narcissist's perception of themselves. 1. The angelic self-concept. Narcissists genuinely believe they are the embodiment of goodness, compassion, and empathy. In their mind, they are the savior in relationships, always giving more than they receive. Their actions, no matter how manipulative or harmful, are reframed as acts of care, tough love, or moral necessity. They see themselves as misunderstood martyrs, bearing the emotional burden of others' supposed shortcomings. 2. Projection of evil. To sustain their self-image, they project their darker traits: manipulativeness, coldness, lack of empathy onto others. You become the villain in their narrative, someone who is emotionally distant or incapable of understanding their pain, is selfish, ungrateful, or lacking in moral virtue. This projection not only protects their self-concept but also justifies their harmful behavior toward you. Why this is dangerous to you. 1. Gaslighting reality. The narcissist's belief that they are the empathetic, virtuous one and that you are the cold, selfish counterpart creates a gaslighting dynamic. They distort your reality, leaving you questioning your own empathy and intentions. Whether you are truly as bad or lacking as they claim. Whether they are justified in their criticisms and actions. This psychological manipulation erodes your confidence, autonomy, and sense of self. 2. Emotional exploitation. By positioning themselves as the empathetic martyr, they subtly, or overtly, demand emotional labor from you. You are expected to recognize and validate their feelings constantly. Apologize for perceived wrongs, even when you are the one being mistreated. Accommodate their needs while neglecting your own, lest you be accused of being selfish or unkind. 3. Moral high ground as a weapon. Their conviction that they are morally superior enables them to justify harmful behaviors while vilifying you. For instance, if they are critical or hurtful, they frame it as necessary honesty or an act of care for your benefit. If they ignore your needs, they claim it is because they are too burdened by your supposed flaws or emotional failings. If you defend yourself, they accuse you of being combative, disrespectful, or incapable of accountability. Their moral high ground becomes a shield against criticism and a weapon to control and dominate. 4. Relational entrapment. Their self-perception as the empathy creates a cycle of dependency. Because they appear so genuinely virtuous, it becomes difficult to confront them or walk away without feeling guilty. You may find yourself trying to fix the relationship or prove your worth to them. Accepting blame for problems they caused, believing their narrative that you are the one at fault. Staying in the relationship out of a misplaced sense of obligation, guilt, or hope that their empathy is real and that they will change. 5. Resistance to accountability. Because they truly believe they are empathetic and good, the narcissist is impervious to feedback. Any attempt to hold them accountable is reframed as an attack on their character, further solidifying their view of you as the evil one. This makes it nearly impossible to address the harm they cause, as they will always perceive themselves as the victim and you as the aggressor. The deeper danger, isolation and emotional erosion over time. This dynamic isolates you emotionally, mentally, and socially. The narcissist's narrative undermines your ability to trust yourself and others. You may feel trapped in their distorted reality, unable to find validation or support outside the relationship because they have painted you as the problem. Their constant projection and moral superiority can lead you to internalize feelings of guilt, shame, or inadequacy, even when you've done nothing wrong. Their subtle manipulation of your perception of yourself and others leaves you feeling isolated, confused, and powerless. Conclusion: Why it's dangerous. The belief that they are true empaths, while seeing you as the source of coldness or evil, allows the narcissist to maintain a self-sustaining cycle of harm that is almost impossible to penetrate. This dynamic is dangerous because it leaves you emotionally vulnerable, erodes your sense of self, and creates a cycle of dependency where you are constantly seeking validation from someone incapable of providing it. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for breaking free. Recognizing that their empathy, while genuine to them, is ultimately selfing, enables you to see the manipulation for what it is. Establishing boundaries and seeking support outside their influence are essential steps in reclaiming your autonomy and protecting yourself from further harm. The key takeaway is this: their self-perceived angelic nature is not a reflection of reality but a distortion that perpetuates their control and your suffering. Recognize it, disengage, and reclaim your reality. The theory of Narcissistics presents an intricate understanding of narcissistic behavior as a self-contained, self-sustaining psychological and existential framework. This framework suggests that narcissists derive emotional and existential gratification primarily from their own actions and thoughts, independent of external validation or outcomes. Within this context, the covert narcissist's tendency to genuinely believe they embody empathy while simultaneously deriving intrinsic satisfaction from manipulative or harmful acts is a particularly insidious dynamic. The danger of perceived empathy. According to the Narcissistics framework, the covert narcissist's belief in their empathic nature may not be mere self-delusion but an internalized component of their self-identity loop. This belief serves as a critical mechanism for, one, self-justification. By viewing their actions as empathetic, they align their behaviors with a morally positive self-concept, reinforcing their grandiose identity. 2. Manipulative efficacy. The semblance of empathy provides them with an effective tool to manipulate and control others while maintaining plausible deniability of their intent. 3. Internal gratification. The act of showing empathy, even when it is distorted or selfing, activates their intrinsic validation system, making them feel superior and fulfilled. The act itself as a self-sustaining reward. In the Narcissistics model, the act itself of engaging in narcissistic behaviors, whether manipulative, controlling, or performatively empathetic, serves as its own reward. For covert narcissists, empathy as a mechanism, their expressions of empathy are often misaligned with genuine emotional resonance but align with their internal narrative of being morally and emotionally superior. Distorted reality. Their cognitive distortion reframes their manipulations as acts of care or emotional insight, which strengthens their self-concept as an empathic individual. The truth is, the covert malignant narcissist truly feels empathy while still embodying the covert narcissistic framework, and this capacity makes them particularly dangerous. The covert malignant narcissist in their twisted minds truly feel that they are good people. Yes, they truly feel empathy, and yes, they truly think they are an empathy in their twisted mind. Enhanced threat from the belief in empathy. The covert narcissist's internal conviction of their empathy heightens their danger for several reasons. Impenetrability. Their belief in their moral superiority shields them from recognizing the harm they inflict, creating a feedback loop that perpetuates destructive behaviors. Cognitive inflexibility. Attempts to challenge their self-perception often reinforce their narrative of victimhood or superiority, further entrenching their narcissistic identity. Impact on others. Their convincing performance of empathy can confuse and destabilize others, making it harder for victims to recognize and resist manipulation. In essence, the covert narcissist's belief in their own empathy, while disconnected from genuine emotional attunement, serves as a core feature of their self-referential system. This belief not only sustains their narcissistic essence but also amplifies their capacity for harm, as it conceals their true motives under a guise of care and understanding. But it isn't just that. They truly feel empathy while still embodying the covert narcissistic framework, and this capacity makes them particularly dangerous. The covert malignant narcissist in their twisted minds truly feel that they are good people. They truly feel empathy. This phenomenon arises from their ability to interpret and experience emotions in a distorted yet internally convincing way, aligning with their selfing narratives while preserving their narcissistic identity. The dual reality of empathy in covert narcissists. 1. Empathy as an internal experience. Unlike overt narcissists who may display an outright lack of empathy, covert narcissists can experience emotions they interpret as empathic. However, these emotions are filtered through a lens of self-referential meaning, wherein the empathic feeling exists to affirm their superiority, moral identity, or control over others. Selective empathy. Their empathic experiences are often triggered by scenarios that enhance their self-concept, such as pity for themselves, admiration for their supposed altruism, or a sense of superiority over others' perceived weaknesses. Distorted motivations. The covert narcissist does not extend empathy to connect with or support others genuinely, rather, their actions are often calculated to reinforce their internal reward system. 2. Danger in conviction. The covert narcissist's genuine experience of empathy, albeit in a warped and self-centered manner, makes them highly effective manipulators. They can convincingly present themselves as deeply compassionate or altruistic, not as a conscious facade but because they internally validate these traits as part of their identity. Emotional authenticity. Their capacity to feel empathic emotions enables them to bypass the skepticism of others, allowing them to disarm potential challengers and secure trust. Internal justification of harm. Their belief in their own empathy allows them to rationalize harmful behaviors. For instance, manipulations or betrayals are reframed in their minds as necessary for the greater good or as acts of tough love. The most dangerous paradox. This duality, the coexistence of perceived empathy with their narcissistic core, makes covert narcissists particularly insidious for the following reasons: enhanced persuasion. Their genuine emotional resonance, albeit warped, allows them to craft compelling narratives of their intentions and actions, making it difficult for others to discern their true motives. Emotional exploitation. By truly feeling their own version of empathy, they are adept at identifying and exploiting the vulnerabilities of others while masking their manipulative intent behind apparent care and concern. Unshakable self-belief. The integration of empathy into their narcissistic identity creates a paradoxical framework wherein they can simultaneously harm and convince themselves of their moral superiority. Amplified harm in relationships. In relational contexts, this form of covert narcissism is particularly destructive. Partners or close associates may feel trapped in a cycle of emotional confusion, as the covert narcissist alternates between seemingly genuine care and subtle, undermining manipulation. The covert narcissist's ability to justify their actions as empathic or necessary can erode the victim's sense of self-worth and reality, as they may struggle to reconcile the narcissist's words with their actions. In this way, the covert narcissist represents a profound psychological paradox. Their genuine experience of empathy, while filtered through a narcissistic framework, does not serve to connect or uplift others but to fortify their self-concept and exert control. This dynamic makes them uniquely dangerous, as their belief in their own goodness shields them from accountability while magnifying their capacity for harm. The narcissist believes they really feel empathy, and this belief becomes a central pillar of their identity. They are convinced that their emotional responses are genuine and profound, aligning perfectly with their self-concept as a compassionate, insightful individual. This conviction is unwavering, even when their actions contradict true empathy. Their sense of feeling empathy enables them to rationalize manipulative behaviors, justify their own needs above others, and maintain a narrative of moral superiority. It is not a conscious deception but an inherent aspect of their narcissistic essence. This belief in their own empathy is impervious to challenge, as it reinforces their self-perception as an emotionally evolved and virtuous being. In their reality, their empathy is both authentic and deeply felt, making them blind to the harm they cause and, paradoxically, intensifying their ability to manipulate and control. This internal certainty about their empathic nature not only sustains their narcissistic identity but also makes them an even more potent force in relationships, as their actions are fueled by an unshakable belief in their emotional righteousness. The narcissist's belief in their ability to feel empathy allows them to maintain a self-image that is not only virtuous but also emotionally superior to those around them. This internalized conviction creates a paradox. While their actions are often harmful, they perceive themselves as benevolent, misunderstood, or even heroic. This self-perception becomes a powerful tool for manipulation, as it shields them from self-reflection and accountability while enhancing their ability to influence others. Because they believe their empathy is real, their manipulative behaviors often appear deliberate yet justified in their own minds. When they cause harm, they see it as an unfortunate but necessary outcome of their supposed insight or care. For instance, they may criticize someone harshly, claiming it is for their own good, all while deriving satisfaction from asserting control or dominance. This belief system creates a dangerous dynamic where the narcissist can simultaneously harm others and feel emotionally validated, further entrenching their narcissistic cycle. Their actions are not tempered by doubt or guilt because they genuinely feel they are acting from a place of emotional awareness, even if that awareness is entirely selfing. This unassailable conviction in their empathy becomes a double-edged sword, cutting through the defenses of their targets while protecting their fragile yet grandiose self-concept. Ultimately, this belief that they truly feel empathy not only sustains their narcissistic identity but also amplifies their ability to deceive, manipulate, and maintain power over others. It is this dangerous mix of self-delusion and emotional persuasion that makes them exceptionally insidious, as they wield the illusion of empathy as both a shield and a weapon. It is not merely a faith-based belief. The narcissist truly feels and genuinely experiences empathy, though to others, this empathy is unmistakably fake. This is not an act or pretense in their mind, it is a real and visceral emotional experience for them, deeply rooted in their distorted self-perception and internal reality. What makes this dynamic so confounding is the dissonance between their subjective experience and the external reality of their actions. To the narcissist, their empathy feels authentic, profound, and even virtuous. They believe they are connecting with others on a deep emotional level, yet this connection is filtered entirely through the lens of their own self-referential needs. Their empathy serves to validate their identity, enhance their sense of moral superiority, or maintain control over their environment. From an external perspective, their empathy appears hollow or performative because it lacks the selflessness and genuine attunement to others that true empathy requires. However, in their internal world, they experience their emotional responses as real and meaningful. This disconnect creates a dangerous dynamic. Their actions may appear caring or considerate but are ultimately calculated to serve their own self-concept, leaving those on the receiving end feeling manipulated, confused, or drained. This capacity to feel and experience empathy in a way that aligns with their narcissistic framework is what makes covert narcissists particularly dangerous. Their empathy is not a tool they consciously wield but an intrinsic part of their distorted reality. To them, it is not fake, it is deeply felt. To others, it is a fade, devoid of true emotional resonance. This duality not only shields the narcissist from accountability but also enables them to wield their empathy as a potent means of influence and control. The covert narcissist's capacity to truly feel and experience empathy while simultaneously weaponizing it for selfing purposes is a deeply paradoxical phenomenon. Unlike overt narcissists, who are often emotionally detached or openly self-centered, covert narcissists genuinely perceive their empathic emotions as authentic. These feelings are not fabricated in the moment, they arise naturally within their internal framework. However, the critical distinction is that their empathy is not attuned to the needs or experiences of others but is instead a reflection of their own narcissistic lens. To the narcissist, these emotions are vivid and real. They may shed tears at someone's pain, express genuine concern, or feel moved by another's plight. Yet, the origin and function of their empathy remain rooted in self-referential motives. For instance, self-validation. Their empathy often serves as evidence to themselves and others that they are compassionate, virtuous, and morally superior. By demonstrating emotional resonance, they bolster their self-image as an enlightened and emotionally intelligent individual. Control mechanism. Their empathic feelings are frequently directed towards situations that allow them to maintain control or influence. For example, they might express empathy to gain someone's trust, making it easier to manipulate them later. Identity preservation. Feeling and displaying empathy reinforces their internal narrative that they are a good person, shielding them from self-awareness about their harmful behaviors. The subjective reality of narcissistic empathy from their perspective, the empathy they feel is indistinguishable from what others would describe as genuine. They might even go to great lengths to showcase their emotional responses, such as consoling a grieving friend or supporting a colleague in distress. However, the emotional experience is inherently limited by their inability to truly connect with the other person's experience. Their focus is not on the other's feelings but on how those feelings relate to their own needs, desires, or identity. For example, if someone expresses sadness, the narcissist might feel a surge of concern not because of the person's pain, but because the situation threatens to disrupt their environment or image. They may feel for someone in distress because it provides them an opportunity to step into the role of savior, thereby reinforcing their sense of self-importance. Alternatively, their empathy might be activated when another's situation mirrors their own struggles, shifting the emotional focus back to their narrative. How this empathy appears fake to others. To the outside observer, the narcissist's empathy often feels insincere, manipulative, or inconsistent. This is because their actions and expressions of care frequently lack depth or continuity. Context-dependent empathy, they are quick to empathize when it benefits them but indifferent or dismissive when it does not. For example, they may console a friend publicly to appear compassionate but show cold indifference to the same friend's private struggles. Empathy without action, they may express deep concern but fail to take meaningful steps to help, revealing a disconnect between their emotional display and genuine care. Emotional disruption, their empathy often shifts the focus back to themselves. For instance, while consoling someone, they might redirect the conversation to their own past experiences of hardship, making the interaction about their struggles rather than the other person's. The danger of experienced empathy. The narcissist's belief in their own empathy and their genuine emotional experience of it makes them exceptionally dangerous for several reasons. 1. Manipulative power. Their emotional authenticity allows them to manipulate others more effectively. Targets of their empathy are less likely to suspect ulterior motives because the narcissist appears genuinely moved and engaged. 2. Emotional confusion. The inconsistency between the narcissist's empathy and their harmful actions creates cognitive dissonance in their victims, making it harder for them to identify the narcissist's true nature. 3. Resistance to accountability. Because the narcissist truly feels their empathy, they are impervious to feedback that challenges their self-perception. They will dismiss criticism as unfair or view themselves as victims of misunderstanding. The ultimate paradox. This paradox of experiencing empathy that feels real to them but appears fake to others underpins the covert narcissist's complexity and danger. They are not simply pretending to care, their emotional responses are deeply felt within the confines of their distorted reality. However, their empathy is ultimately selfing, directed not toward the well-being of others but toward reinforcing their identity, maintaining control, and ensuring their psychological gratification. This makes them more insidious than those who merely feign empathy, as their genuine feelings create a powerful illusion of connection. For those in their orbit, the covert narcissist's empathy can feel both real and profoundly damaging, leaving victims questioning their own perceptions, boundaries, and worth. The covert narcissist thus becomes a master of emotional manipulation, not through deliberate deceit alone, but through the conviction and intensity of their self-referential emotional experience. They truly feel empathy, and that is precisely what makes them the most dangerous. This capacity to experience empathy, albeit in a distorted and self-referential manner, allows them to blend seamlessly into relationships, communities, and environments where compassion and emotional connection are highly valued. Their empathy feels real to them because it is real but only in a way that serves their needs, reinforces their identity, and sustains their control. This trait makes them exceptionally effective at gaining trust, dismantling defenses, and embedding themselves deeply in the lives of others. Unlike individuals who lack emotional resonance entirely, covert narcissists leverage their empathic feelings to construct a powerful illusion of care and connection. This is not an act of conscious deceit, it is an inherent part of their psychological makeup. They can look into someone's pain and feel a response, but the purpose of that response is not connection or support, it is the fulfillment of their own identity and needs. Why their empathy makes them so dangerous. 1. Convincing authenticity. Their ability to feel and display empathy makes them incredibly convincing. They come across as emotionally aware, understanding, and compassionate, which disarms suspicion and lowers the defenses of others. People are naturally drawn to what they perceive as genuine care, making it easier for the covert narcissist to manipulate and influence. 2. Selective vulnerability. Because they feel empathy in a way that centers on their own experiences, they can present themselves as deeply vulnerable and relatable. This draws others in, creating bonds of trust and loyalty that can later be exploited. 3. Emotional entrapment. Their empathy is a tool that ensnares others in cycles of dependency. For example, they may offer profound emotional support at one moment, only to use that trust to subtly undermine or control their target later. Their victims are left questioning their own perceptions because the empathy felt so real. 4. Impenetrable self-delusion. The covert narcissist's genuine belief in their own empathy makes it nearly impossible for them to see the harm they cause. They rationalize their manipulations and abuses as necessary acts of care, shielding them from self-awareness and accountability. This conviction allows them to continue their behavior unchecked, even when confronted with evidence of their impact. 5. Emotional precision. Their ability to feel empathy gives them a heightened awareness of others' emotional states, allowing them to tailor their manipulations with precision. They know exactly what to say or do to elicit trust, admiration, or compliance, making their influence all the more pervasive. The devastation they leave behind. A covert narcissist's dangerous blend of empathy and manipulation creates a unique kind of relational damage. Their victims often feel deeply confused and destabilized, as the narcissist alternates between genuine seeming care and subtle, insidious harm. The authenticity of the narcissist's emotional expressions makes it difficult for others to reconcile their actions with their apparent empathy. This confusion leaves victims doubting their own experiences and struggling to extricate themselves from the narcissist's influence. The paradox of empathy and harm. Their empathy is both their greatest strength and their most destructive weapon. It is a paradoxical force that allows them to feel connected to others while simultaneously prioritizing their own needs above all else. To them, their actions are not malicious but justified by the emotions they genuinely feel. Yet to those around them, the damage is undeniable. Relationships are drained, trust is eroded, and emotional boundaries are repeatedly crossed. The covert narcissist's ability to genuinely feel empathy, coupled with their inability to channel it toward selfless or constructive ends, makes them not only dangerous but profoundly destabilizing to the lives of those they affect. It is this duality, real emotional experience paired with manipulative intent, that solidifies their role as some of the most insidious emotional predators in human relationships. The blend of genuine empathy and selfing manipulation within the Narcissistics framework is deadly because it creates a paradoxical dynamic where the covert narcissist becomes both convincing and profoundly destructive. Their ability to feel empathy real to them but filtered through their narcissistic lens makes their behaviors more effective and insidious, as their intentions remain hidden beneath a veneer of care and compassion. This combination undermines the ability of their targets to recognize the manipulation, while simultaneously empowering the narcissist to cause significant emotional, psychological, and relational harm. Why the blend is deadly in Narcissistics. 1. Empathy as a tool for manipulation. The covert narcissist's genuine experience of empathy enables them to identify the emotional states and vulnerabilities of others with precision. However, rather than using this awareness to build authentic connections, they exploit it to reinforce their sense of control and superiority. In Narcissistics, this ability is a critical aspect of their self-referential system, emotional targeting. Their empathy allows them to determine the exact approach needed to disarm, influence, or manipulate someone. This can range from offering tailored comfort to exploiting insecurities. Perceived authenticity. Because they genuinely feel their version of empathy, their manipulative actions seem spontaneous and sincere, making them difficult to detect. 2. Disarming defense mechanisms. Victims of narcissists often rely on skepticism or emotional distance to protect themselves. However, the covert narcissist's emotional resonance breaks through these defenses by presenting themselves as genuinely understanding and supportive. Their empathy feels real because, to them, it is real. This leads targets to lower their guard, allowing the narcissist to infiltrate their emotional lives with minimal resistance. 3 dual realities, internal authenticity and external harm. Within the Narcissistics framework, the covert narcissist's belief in their empathy creates a deadly duality. Internal authenticity, their feelings validate their self-concept as a caring and virtuous individual, justifying their actions regardless of the harm caused. This shields them from guilt or accountability. External harm, to others, their empathy is hollow or misaligned, as it ultimately serves the narcissist's needs rather than offering genuine support. This misalignment creates confusion and deep emotional wounds in their targets, who may struggle to reconcile the perceived care with the resulting harm. For emotional entrapment through dependency, this blend creates a cycle of emotional dependency that is particularly difficult to escape. The narcissist alternates between moments of genuine seeming empathy and subtle manipulation, leaving their targets oscillating between trust and doubt. This instability fosters confusion, as victims are unsure whether the narcissist is truly caring or calculating. Creates a dependency on the narcissist for emotional validation, as their moments of empathy are often the only source of apparent comfort. 5. Immunity to accountability. The narcissist's genuine belief in their empathy makes it nearly impossible to confront them about their behavior. In their mind, they are acting out of care or moral superiority, not malice. Any attempt to challenge their actions is reframed as an attack on their character or as evidence of the accuser's own flaws. This creates a psychological loop where the narcissist is always justified, and their targets are left feeling powerless to hold them accountable. The deadly consequences in Narcissistics. The Narcissistics framework reveals how this blend of empathy and narcissism creates a self-perpetuating cycle of harm that affects multiple layers of interaction. Individual level, targets experience emotional confusion, self-doubt, and psychological trauma, as they struggle to reconcile the narcissist's actions with their perceived empathy. Relational level, relationships are destabilized by the covert narcissist's alternating patterns of care and control, leaving victims emotionally drained and unable to establish healthy boundaries. Systemic level, in broader contexts, such as workplaces or communities, the covert narcissist thrives by manipulating group dynamics, creating divisions, and undermining collective trust. The deadly nature of this blend lies in its subtlety and effectiveness. Unlike overtly malicious individuals, the covert narcissist's empathy makes them appear well-meaning, even as they systematically dismantle the emotional well-being of those around them. This dissonance not only amplifies the harm they cause but also ensures that their actions remain hidden under the guise of care and compassion. In the Narcissistics model, this combination is the ultimate embodiment of covert malignant narcissism, a self-sustaining system where empathy is weaponized to fulfill narcissistic needs while perpetuating emotional and relational destruction. This makes their influence not only difficult to detect but also profoundly damaging to individuals, relationships, and organizations alike. The ultimate conclusion of this exploration within the framework of Narcissistics is that the covert narcissist's ability to genuinely feel and experience empathy, while still operating from a self-centered and manipulative core, represents a uniquely insidious psychological dynamic. This paradox allows them to blend authenticity with deceit, making their actions profoundly destructive while remaining largely undetected. Key takeaways: 1. Empathy as a weapon. Covert narcissists weaponize their emotional experiences, using their genuine feelings of empathy to gain trust, manipulate others, and maintain control. Their empathy is real to them but ultimately selfing, filtered through their narcissistic need for validation and superiority. 2. Unassailable conviction. Their belief in their own empathy shields them from self-awareness and accountability. They truly see themselves as compassionate and morally upright, making it nearly impossible to confront or reform their behavior. 3. Emotional and relational harm. The covert narcissist's blend of perceived empathy and manipulation destabilizes relationships, leaving victims confused, dependent, and emotionally drained. The dissonance between their actions and their apparent care creates lasting psychological damage. For self-sustaining system, in Narcissistics, this dynamic reinforces itself in a closed loop. The narcissist's actions, no matter how harmful, validate their self-perception as empathetic and virtuous, perpetuating their behavior and ensuring its resilience against external challenges. The ultimate conclusion: covert narcissists represent a dangerous psychological paradox. They are deeply harmful not in spite of their empathy but because of it. Their genuine emotional experiences, warped by their self-referential framework, make them more effective at manipulation and harm. This dynamic creates a unique form of relational toxicity that is difficult to detect, confront, or escape. Understanding this phenomenon is critical for protecting oneself from their influence. It emphasizes the importance of recognizing their patterns, setting firm boundaries, and resisting the allure of their seemingly authentic care. It also underscores the futility of trying to change or hold them accountable, as their self-sustaining system is inherently resistant to external influence. The ultimate lesson is this: in dealing with covert narcissists, knowledge and boundaries are your best defenses. Recognizing the paradox of their empathy, the fact that it is both real to them and a tool for manipulation, provides clarity and empowers individuals to disengage from their destructive cycles. The Narcissistics framework is a comprehensive theory that redefines narcissism as a self-contained, self-sustaining system where the narcissist's identity, emotional satisfaction, and existence revolve around internal validation rather than external relationships or outcomes. At its core, Narcissistics frames narcissism not as a disorder but as an ontological state, a way of being driven by the narcissistic essence. Core principles of Narcissistics: 1. Self-relation as the foundation. Narcissists derive their existence and identity from their internal narcissistic dynamics, rendering external validation optional or irrelevant. Their behaviors serve to reinforce their self-concept rather than achieve external goals. 2. The act itself as reward. Narcissistic actions, manipulation, self-aggrandizement, or control provide intrinsic gratification, independent of outcomes or consequences. The process of acting narcissistically is both the means and the end. 3. Self-sustaining identity loop. Their narcissistic identity perpetuates itself in a closed feedback loop, where their actions validate their self-concept, and their self-concept drives their actions. This makes their personality highly resistant to change. 4. Empathy as a narcissistic tool. Empathy in narcissists, particularly covert ones, is a paradoxical dynamic. They genuinely feel empathy but filter it through a self-centered lens, using it to validate their superiority, gain control, or manipulate others. Their empathy feels real to them but ultimately serves their narcissistic essence rather than genuine connection. 5. Distortion of reality. Narcissists reframe external events, emotions, and feedback to fit their narrative of superiority. This superposition supply fuel allows them to extract validation from any situation, even those that might seem damaging to others. 6. Immunity to accountability. Their self-contained system makes them impervious to criticism or external influence. Challenges to their identity are reframed as attacks or evidence of others' flaws, further reinforcing their sense of self-righteousness. The empathy-based narcissist. Incorporating the covert, empathy-based narcissist into this framework reveals a particularly dangerous form of narcissism. Their ability to genuinely feel empathy makes them more convincing and effective as manipulators. However, this empathy is not directed outward with selfless intent. It serves to reinforce their identity as a virtuous and emotionally superior person. Disarm, control, or manipulate others. Justify harmful behaviors under the guise of care or moral necessity. Their empathy is not a fade but a genuine experience warped to serve their narcissistic cycle. This duality makes them difficult to detect and even harder to hold accountable. Implications and applications. Relational dynamics. Covert narcissists destabilize relationships through emotional manipulation, blending care with control, and leaving victims confused and dependent. Therapeutic interventions. Traditional therapy often fails because the narcissist's self-sustaining identity loop resists external influence. Successful strategies must disrupt their internal dynamics subtly or redirect their behaviors toward constructive self-expression. Protective strategies. Understanding the framework helps individuals recognize and disengage from the cycles of emotional entrapment narcissists create, emphasizing boundaries and emotional autonomy. Ultimate takeaway: the Narcissistics framework highlights that narcissists are driven by an intrinsic system of self-validation, making their behaviors self-perpetuating and resistant to change. Empathy-based narcissists represent a particularly insidious form, as their emotional resonance enhances their capacity for harm while maintaining their self-delusion of virtue. Recognizing these dynamics is critical for identifying, understanding, and mitigating the impacts of narcissistic behaviors in personal, relational, and systemic contexts. Within the framework of Narcissistics, certain serial killers have exhibited behaviors and mindsets aligned with the belief that they were morally righteous or empathetic individuals while committing heinous acts. These individuals often reframed their actions as necessary, justified, or even altruistic in their distorted minds, casting themselves as saviors, avengers, or misunderstood angels, and their victims as deserving of their fate. Below are examples of serial killers who embodied this delusion. 1. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy believed he was a charming, intelligent, and morally superior individual. While he committed unspeakable acts of violence against women, Bundy presented himself as a kind, empathetic man, often feigning concern to lure his victims. Empathy as a weapon. Bundy would pretend to have a broken arm or require assistance, appealing to the compassion of his victims. In his mind, this manipulation reinforced his self-perception as clever and resourceful. The angelic self. Despite his crimes, Bundy saw himself as misunderstood and often downplayed his responsibility, blaming external factors or society for his behavior. 2. Dennis Rader, BTK killer. Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK killer, bind, torture, kill, lived a double life as a family man, church leader, and community member. He believed himself to be a good person despite torturing and murdering his victims. Self-perception as empathic. Rader would write taunting letters to law enforcement, portraying himself as a misunderstood figure deserving of recognition for his intelligence and patience. Moral justification. Rader claimed his victims were chosen because they fit into his fantasy, rationalizing his acts as an expression of his needs while still seeing himself as a loving father and churchgoer. 3. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy presented himself as a pillar of the community, hosting charity events and working as a clown at children's parties, while secretly killing young men and boys. Angelic persona. Gacy believed he was doing good for his community by entertaining children and engaging in local politics, maintaining the image of a kind and empathetic man. Projection of evil. Gacy consistently denied responsibility for his crimes, blaming his victims or suggesting they brought their fate upon themselves, reinforcing his narrative of innocence. 4. Ed Gein. Ed Gein, who inspired fictional characters like Norman Bates, Psycho, and Buffalo Bill, the Silence of the Lambs, believed he was helping his deceased mother by using parts of his victims to create objects and clothing. Twisted empathy. Gein believed his actions were guided by love and devotion to his mother, reframing his crimes as acts of care rather than desecration. Self-perceived righteousness. In his mind, he was not a killer but a grieving son trying to maintain a connection with his lost parent. 5. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos, a rare female serial killer, believed she was killing out of self-defense or necessity. Her crimes were often framed by her as a response to abuse or exploitation by her victims. Self-perception as a victim. Wuornos viewed herself as a protector, avenging past wrongs committed against her by men, and claimed she was acting out of desperation rather than malice. Empathy with justification. She believed her actions were morally justifiable because they aligned with her narrative of survival and self-defense, even as evidence contradicted her claims. Why this is dangerous in Narcissistics. These examples align with the Narcissistics framework, where the narcissist genuinely believes they are virtuous while projecting evil onto others. Serial killers like those mentioned often embody the following traits: 1. Self-righteousness. They see their actions as justified or necessary, often casting themselves as victims or saviors. 2. Empathy with a distorted lens. Their belief in their own care or righteousness fuels their sense of moral superiority, even when their actions are heinous. 3. Projection of blame. They externalize responsibility, framing their victims as deserving or complicit, which protects their self-image from accountability. This mindset not only allows such individuals to carry out horrific acts but also to maintain their self-perception as angels or misunderstood figures, making them exceptionally dangerous and resistant to accountability. Examples of serial killers exhibiting this mindset. 1. Herbert Mullen. Herbert Mullen believed that his murders were necessary to prevent catastrophic natural disasters. He thought his victims' deaths were sacrifices to stabilize the earth and prevent earthquakes. Empathy distorted into justification. Mullen felt he was saving humanity, casting himself as a benevolent figure acting for the greater good. Projection of evil. He viewed those who opposed him or tried to stop him as obstacles to his righteous mission. 2. Joseph Paul Franklin. Franklin, a racist and anti-Semitic serial killer, believed his murders were acts of moral and social cleansing. He targeted minorities and interracial couples, perceiving his actions as justified by his twisted ideology. Self-perceived angelic role. Franklin saw himself as a crusader, believing he was acting out of righteous indignation. Empathy reframed. In his mind, he was protecting a societal ideal, even though his actions were rooted in hatred. 3. Charles Manson. Manson, leader of the Manson family, convinced his followers that his orders to commit murder were acts of divine will or revolutionary necessity. Angelic persona. Manson portrayed himself as a spiritual guide and savior, convincing others that his actions were for a higher cause. Projection of evil. He framed society, authority figures, and his victims as corrupt or harmful, justifying their deaths in his warped narrative. 4. Joachim Kroll, the Ruhr cannibal. Kroll, a German serial killer, justified his murders by claiming he was helping overpopulated communities by killing and cannibalizing victims to save food resources. Twisted altruism. Kroll saw his actions as practical and empathetic, claiming he was solving a societal problem while sustaining himself. Self-perceived innocence. Despite the brutality of his crimes, he believed his actions were logical and necessary. 5. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Ramirez believed he was serving Satan and acting as an agent of darkness, but he often framed his victims as sinners who deserved their fate. Empathy with distortion. Ramirez saw himself as a chosen figure, embodying a higher moral or spiritual mission, despite the terror he inflicted. Demonization of others. He viewed his victims as morally inferior or deserving of their suffering, further justifying his actions. Summary of the Narcissistics framework. The Narcissistics framework posits that narcissists are self-sustaining, self-referential systems who derive their identity, emotional gratification, and existence from their own internal dynamics. They do not rely on external validation or feedback but instead create an internal feedback loop that reinforces their self-concept. Core features. 1. Self-relation as the foundation. Narcissists derive their sense of existence entirely from within, justifying their actions and identity without external input. 2. The act itself as reward. Their behaviors, such as manipulation or control, are intrinsically gratifying. The process of acting narcissistically is the goal, regardless of external outcomes. 3. Empathy as a distorted mechanism. They genuinely feel empathy but through a warped, selfing lens. Their empathy validates their own superiority or moral identity, making it a tool for manipulation and control. 4. Projection of evil. Narcissists project their darker traits, manipulation, lack of empathy, or malice onto others. They frame themselves as virtuous, empathetic angels while painting others as the villains. 5. Superposition supply fuel. Narcissists can derive validation from any situation by reframing reality to support their narrative, whether they succeed, fail, or face criticism. 6. Self-sustaining identity loop. Their narcissistic identity perpetuates itself in a closed loop. Actions reinforce self-concept, and the self-concept drives further actions, making change or accountability nearly impossible. Why it's dangerous. The framework highlights that narcissists, especially those who see themselves as true empaths or angels, are uniquely insidious. Their belief in their moral and emotional superiority allows them to manipulate, harm, and control others while remaining immune to accountability. This dynamic creates emotional confusion, relational dependency, and lasting psychological harm for those entangled with them. Recognizing and disengaging from these patterns is critical for protection and recovery. Examples of serial killers who thought this way: 1. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. Ridgway, who confessed to killing dozens of women, often claimed he was helping society by targeting sex workers. He believed he was doing moral work by cleansing the world of individuals he deemed immoral. Twisted empathy. Ridgway claimed to care about his victims and their souls, even praying over their bodies after killing them. Angelic self-image. In his mind, his actions were justified as part of a higher moral purpose, while society's inability to understand him painted them as the real problem. 2. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. Sutcliffe, who murdered 13 women in England, believed he was on a divine mission. He claimed that the voice of God directed him to rid the world of sex workers. Self-perception as chosen. Sutcliffe believed he was carrying out God's will, painting himself as a savior while dismissing the horrific consequences of his actions. Projection of evil. He viewed his victims as sinners, seeing their deaths as justified and even necessary in his distorted moral framework. 3. Edmund Kemper, the co-ed killer. Kemper, who killed his grandparents, mother, and multiple young women, saw himself as a victim of society and family dysfunction. He believed his actions were an expression of his misunderstood genius and intellect. Empathy as self-justification. Kemper framed his killings as a way of sparing his victims from the pain of the world or as a response to his own suffering. Angelic self-image. He often spoke about his intelligence and insights, believing his perspective was superior to others and justifying his violence as a product of this superiority. 4. Andre Thomas. Andre Thomas, who killed his estranged wife, their son, and her daughter, believed he was saving their souls. He reportedly claimed that God directed him to commit these murders to remove demons. Spiritual self-righteousness. Thomas viewed himself as divinely guided, acting out of a twisted sense of care for his victims. Projection of evil. He saw his family as corrupted or possessed, painting himself as the savior protecting them from eternal damnation. 5. Adolfo Constanzo, the narco-Satanist. Constanzo was the leader of a cult that practiced ritualistic killings, often of cartel members, believing these sacrifices would provide protection and power. Self-perception as a protector. Constanzo framed his killings as sacred acts, designed to shield his followers and clients from harm. Empathy for his mission. He believed his actions were justified because they were carried out in service of a spiritual cause, elevating his status as a moral leader in his cult. 6. Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer. Alcala, known for his charm and intelligence, saw himself as an attractive, morally misunderstood figure who was superior to his victims. He believed his actions were justified by his own sense of entitlement and brilliance. Empathy as manipulation. Alcala used his charm and perceived emotional depth to lure victims, believing he was entitled to their trust and admiration. Projection of evil. He dismissed his crimes as misunderstood brilliance, often reframing his victims as naive or beneath his intellect. Narcistics, how their twisted minds work. The Narcistics framework explains how narcissists, including those with dangerous tendencies like serial killers, operate from a self-contained system of distorted reality. Narcissists genuinely believe they are virtuous, empathetic, and morally superior individuals while simultaneously demonizing others as evil, lacking, or deserving of punishment. This warped mindset creates a paradox where their harmful actions feel justified and even righteous. Key features in serial killer examples. 1. Self-perceived empathy. They feel empathy but only through a distorted lens. This empathy serves to reinforce their self-image as saviors, avengers, or misunderstood heroes. Examples: Ridgway prayed for his victims, Sutcliffe believed God commanded him. 2. Angelic self-image: they truly see themselves as agents of good, whether spiritual, intellectual, or moral, who are misunderstood by a world too evil or ignorant to appreciate their mission. Examples: Constanzo viewed himself as a protector, Thomas believed he was saving souls. 3. Projection of evil: to sustain their narrative, they project their own cruelty, manipulation, or malice onto their victims or society. This allows them to justify their actions as necessary or even virtuous. Examples: Manson framed his victims as threats to his revolution, Gacy claimed his victims were complicit in their deaths. 4. Self-sustaining reality: their belief system operates in a closed loop. Any external criticism is dismissed as further proof of others' flaws, and their own actions only serve to validate their perceived righteousness. Why it's dangerous: this twisted mindset is dangerous because it creates a psychological framework where harm is rationalized as good. These individuals are not just manipulative, they truly believe in their own virtue, making them more committed and harder to detect. Their empathy, though warped, allows them to connect with and manipulate others more effectively, disarming suspicion and enabling them to act unchecked. The ultimate danger lies in the fact that their self-righteousness justifies infinite harm in their minds. They are not acting out of hatred alone, but from a deeply held belief that they are the heroes of their story and you are the villain. Recognizing this dynamic is essential to understanding their behavior and mitigating their impact. Yes, within the Narcissistics framework, these individuals, whether they are narcissists, serial killers, or manipulators, are genuinely convinced that they are empaths and moral individuals. They truly feel emotions that they interpret as empathy, but this empathy is entirely self-referential. In their minds, they are angels, saviors, or misunderstood victims acting from a place of emotional awareness and care. However, this empathy is filtered through their narcissistic lens, making it warped and dangerous. To the outside world, their empathy feels fake because it lacks the selflessness, attunement, and authenticity of true empathy. Their emotional responses are not about understanding or alleviating others' suffering, but about reinforcing their own identity, control, and superiority. They weaponize these feelings to manipulate and harm, all while believing they are acting virtuously. Examples of criminals who were convinced of their empathy and virtue: 1. Ted Bundy, belief in his charm and goodness. Bundy saw himself as charismatic and believed he could easily connect with people emotionally. He felt his ability to manipulate and lure victims was a testament to his emotional intelligence and charm. Fake empathy: Bundy pretended to be injured or in distress to lure victims, believing this demonstrated his cleverness and ability to inspire trust. While he felt a form of connection with his victims, it was entirely about his needs, not theirs. 2. Joanna Dennehy, the femme fatale killer. Dennehy murdered multiple men for what she described as fun and claimed she didn't feel guilt because they deserved it. Self-perception: as a relatable, caring person, despite her violence, Dennehy believed she could connect emotionally with people. She manipulated and charmed her accomplices, convincing them of her loyalty and understanding, even while orchestrating murders. 3. Israel Keyes, rationalization of his crimes. Keyes, who confessed to multiple murders, saw himself as methodical and intelligent. He believed his victims were chosen carefully and viewed his actions as a controlled outlet for his darker impulses, which he reframed as necessary for his emotional equilibrium. Empathy as a distorted tool: Keyes would sometimes express care or engage in normal conversations with his victims before killing them, believing this made him more humane. 4. Carla Homolka, the role of the good wife. As part of her partnership with Paul Bernardo, Carla Homolka participated in the sexual assault and murder of several young women, including her own sister. Homolka framed herself as a victim of Bernardo's coercion while actively participating in the crimes. Fake empathy: Homolka claimed to feel deep remorse for her actions, but her statements in court were riddled with selfing narratives. She presented herself as emotionally attuned and repentant while minimizing her responsibility. 5. Chris Watts, the family killer. Watts murdered his wife and 2 young daughters, then tried to present himself as a grieving husband and father. He gave tearful public pleas for their safe return, all while knowing he had killed them. Self-perception as a caring father, Watts believed he was a good family man and rationalized his actions as solving a problem he created. His public displays of emotion seemed genuine to many but were ultimately performative and selfing. 6. Diane Downs, the loving mother. Downs shot her 3 children, killing one, and claimed it was an attack by a stranger. She even gave interviews in which she appeared emotional and concerned for her surviving children. Self-perceived victimhood. Downs believed she was a loving mother who had been unfairly targeted by society. Her emotional displays, though convincing to some, were later revealed to be part of her manipulation strategy. Why their empathy feels fake to outsiders. The empathy displayed by such individuals feels hollow or calculated because, 1. It is self-referential. Their empathy centers on how a situation affects them, rather than truly understanding or sharing in another's emotions. They often appear disconnected from the actual suffering of others. 2. It is inconsistent. They show empathy selectively, depending on whether it serves their narrative or goals. They may feign concern in public while showing callous indifference in private. 3. It is performative. Their emotional displays often feel exaggerated, forced, or overly dramatic, as they use these moments to bolster their self-image or manipulate others. How Narcissistics explains this mindset. 1. Self-perceived angelic identity. These individuals genuinely believe they are empathetic, virtuous, and emotionally superior, even while committing horrific acts. Their empathy reinforces their narcissistic identity, allowing them to rationalize their behavior as morally justified or necessary. 2. Projection of evil. They cast others' victims, society, or even critics as the true villains, absolving themselves of responsibility. In their mind, they are not only justified but heroic in their actions. 3. Emotional manipulation. Their capacity to feel distorted empathy makes them highly skilled manipulators, as they can mimic genuine emotional connection while pursuing selfing goals. The danger of these individuals. Their belief in their own virtue makes them resistant to accountability and immune to guilt or remorse. Their ability to feel empathy, even in a distorted way, allows them to manipulate and control others more effectively. They leave lasting emotional damage on those they target, who often struggle to reconcile the narcissist's apparent care with their harmful actions. Ultimately, the Narcissistics framework shows that these individuals are not merely pretending to feel, they genuinely experience emotions that they interpret as empathy. However, this empathy is entirely selfing, making it both deceptive and dangerous. Indeed, the concept of Narcissistics, where narcissists believe they are true empaths, perceive themselves as good, and see others as the villains, makes these individuals exceptionally hard to detect and even more dangerous. Their ability to genuinely feel distorted empathy while projecting evil onto others creates a chilling dynamic. Below are examples of criminals from around the world whose behaviors align with this framework, illustrating how their self-perceived virtue masked their darker intentions. Criminals who believed they were good while seeing others as evil. 1. Ted Bundy, United States. Profile: Bundy was a notorious serial killer who murdered at least 30 women. Despite his heinous crimes, he viewed himself as charming, intelligent, and morally superior to his victims. Self-perception as an angel. Bundy believed his manipulative abilities and his capacity to charm others demonstrated his inherent goodness and superiority. Projection of evil. He saw his victims as weak, inferior, or deserving of their fate. He rationalized his actions as justified and felt no remorse. 2. Anders Breivik, Norway. Profile: Breivik killed 77 people in a bombing and mass shooting in 2011, claiming it was part of his mission to save Europe from multiculturalism. Self-perception as a savior. Breivik believed he was acting as a moral and cultural protector, saving society from what he perceived as moral decay. Projection of evil. He viewed his victims as agents of societal destruction, rationalizing their deaths as necessary for the greater good. 3. Charles Manson, United States. Profile: Manson led a cult known as the Manson family, orchestrating a series of brutal murders, including that of actress Sharon Tate, as part of his vision for an apocalyptic race war. Self-perception as a prophet, Manson believed he was a spiritual guide chosen to lead humanity to enlightenment. He viewed his actions as divinely inspired. Projection of evil, he painted society and his victims as corrupt and deserving of punishment, casting himself as a misunderstood revolutionary. 4. Aum Shinrikyo cult, Japan, profile, this doomsday cult, led by Shoko Asahara, carried out the 1995 Tokyo subway sarin gas attack, killing 13 people and injuring thousands. Self-perception as enlightened leaders, Asahara claimed his actions were part of a divine plan to cleanse humanity and lead followers to spiritual salvation. Projection of evil, the cult saw the Japanese government and society as spiritually bankrupt, rationalizing the attack as a necessary act of purification. 5. Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, United Kingdom, profile, this duo, known as the Moors murderers, killed 5 children in the 1960s. Hindley, in particular, claimed she was manipulated by Brady and framed herself as a victim. Self-perception as a victim, Hindley believed she was misunderstood and blamed others for her involvement, maintaining an image of innocence. Projection of evil, both Hindley and Brady justified their crimes by dehumanizing their victims, seeing them as expendable in their pursuit of personal pleasure and dominance. 6. Oscar Pistorius, South Africa, profile, Pistorius, a former Olympic athlete, was convicted of killing his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp, claiming it was an accidental shooting. Self-perception as tragic hero, Pistorius maintained that he was a good person who made a mistake, presenting himself as emotionally broken and misunderstood. Projection of evil, he implied that critics and prosecutors misunderstood his actions, painting himself as a victim of circumstance rather than a perpetrator. 7. Javed Iqbal, Pakistan, profile, Iqbal murdered 100 children, claiming he wanted to expose police incompetence and societal apathy. Self-perception as a martyr, he believed his crimes were a necessary statement to draw attention to the plight of street children and corruption. Projection of evil, Iqbal viewed society as complicit in the suffering of children, rationalizing his actions as an act of twisted justice. 8. Marc Dutroux, Belgium, profile, Dutroux was a pedophile and serial killer who abducted and murdered young girls. He maintained that he was misunderstood and claimed his crimes were exaggerated by the media. Self-perception as a provider, Dutroux claimed he was caring for his victims, believing he was offering them protection even as he inflicted harm. Projection of evil, he painted law enforcement and society as hypocritical, accusing them of being more corrupt than himself. 9. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, United States, profile, Ramirez, a Satanist and serial killer, terrorized California with a series of brutal home invasions, murders, and assaults. Self-perception as chosen by darkness, Ramirez believed his actions were divinely guided by Satan, casting himself as a misunderstood figure fulfilling a spiritual destiny. Projection of evil, he viewed his victims as morally weak or deserving of their suffering, reframing his actions as part of a cosmic balance. 10. Brenton Tarrant, New Zealand, profile, Tarrant carried out the Christchurch mosque shootings in 2019, killing 51 people. He claimed his actions were part of a global effort to combat immigration and protect Western culture. Self-perception as a crusader, Tarrant believed he was protecting his people and culture from an existential threat, justifying his actions as necessary for survival. Projection of evil, he viewed immigrants and Muslims as invaders, dehumanizing them to rationalize his violent ideology. Why this is terrifying in Narcissistics, they truly believe their narrative. These individuals are not merely pretending, they genuinely believe they are acting for the greater good, making them more committed to their cause and harder to stop. Their empathy feels real to them. Their ability to feel a distorted version of empathy allows them to manipulate and deceive others more effectively, gaining trust and lowering defenses. Projection deflects accountability. By casting others as evil or deserving of harm, they remove themselves from responsibility, reinforcing their self-image as virtuous. Hard to detect, their self-perceived goodness masks their true intentions, making them appear empathetic or relatable, even as they commit atrocities. Conclusion: Narcissistics in action. The Narcissistics framework explains how individuals like these criminals operate within a self-contained system where their identity as empaths, saviors, or moral crusaders is central. Their twisted belief in their own virtue allows them to rationalize harm while projecting evil onto others. Recognizing this mindset is crucial for identifying and confronting such dangerous personalities before they cause further harm.